On the surface, Judge Olivia Hartman's visit to West Haven Correctional Facility was routine, part of a judicial oversight initiative. But prison staff noticed subtle irregularities early on. Extra time spent in private interviews, late-day meetings that extended past protocol. No formal complaint was ever filed, and the oversight log showed nothing more than follow-up case reviews. It wasn't until Internal Affairs reviewed surveillance footage during an unrelated investigation that Olivia and Daryl's interactions began to raise eyebrows. Footage showed them conversing just out of audio range, too often and too privately. Correctional Officer Jeremy Sloan, who had been on duty during several of these encounters, later told investigators she wasn't acting like a judge. She was acting like someone smitten. What no one yet knew was that their relationship had already crossed into physical intimacy, carefully arranged and facilitated in unused administrative spaces. Olivia, battling loneliness and an unraveling marriage back home, had convinced herself this was under control. Daryl, however, knew exactly what he was doing. He had seduced before. He had manipulated before. This was just another mark. 3 months into the affair, Olivia missed a routine gynecological checkup. When she finally went, the results would quietly shatter her. She tested positive for HIV. She told no one, not her husband, not her doctor, and certainly not the court, but her behavior changed. She canceled scheduled oversight meetings. She became withdrawn in hearings. She stopped attending her legal mentorship sessions. Rumors of burnout spread, but no one suspected the truth. Meanwhile, Daryl King was moving on to his next game, unaware that the woman he had ensnared was about to become unpredictable. Olivia sat in her car outside the clinic, the blood test report still open on the passenger seat, reactive. It read, the word had repeated itself in her mind for days now she hadn't slept. She hadn't confronted Daryl. She hadn't even told her husband, Eric, who had noticed her growing distance but chalked it up to work stress. She couldn't bring herself to speak the words aloud. I have HIV. At home, the silence between Olivia and Eric was stretching thinner each day. She avoided physical contact. Their once regular dinners became takeout and microwaved leftovers. She declined invitations from colleagues, skipped faculty luncheons, and ignored voicemails from her mentees. Olivia wasn't just hiding from others. She was hiding from herself. Meanwhile, inside West Haven Correctional, Daryl King had taken notice of Olivia's absence. Their meetings had ceased without warning. He asked Officer Sloan if Judge Hartman was scheduled for another visit, to which the guard coldly replied, "She's not on the list. You should stop asking." Daryl wasn't alarmed. He was annoyed. He'd seen it before, people who thought they could handle deception, but cracked under the pressure. To him, Olivia was no different than the gullible investors he'd defrauded years ago. Smart, but emotionally starved. Predictable. But what he didn't expect was how the infection would break Olivia from within. She began documenting everything, dates, encounters, symptoms, then shredded the pages as soon as she wrote them. She obsessively cleaned her home, avoided sharp objects, and spent hours reading legal precedents on non-disclosure and criminal transmission. At one point, she picked up her phone and dialed the number for the state's Judicial Ethics Commission. Her finger hovered over the call button. Then she hung up. She wasn't ready for consequences, just questions. And in the background, something else stirred. A former nurse at the prison, recently transferred, had left a tip with Internal Affairs. There was something wrong about those visits. They weren't professional. I saw things. It was vague, but enough to start a quiet file. Unofficial, unnamed, but not ignored. Daryl King sat across from his new prison counselor, eyes alert, posture relaxed. The counselor, Melissa Grant, had just been transferred from another state facility and had no prior relationship with him. "You've had fewer disciplinary write-ups than most," she remarked, flipping through his file. "You blend in." Daryl smiled. "I'm just trying to do my time, ma'am." But Melissa had been warned before arriving. Another counselor had mentioned Daryl's charisma and a tendency to form inappropriate emotional bonds with female staff. Her instincts sharpened when she noticed how he tested boundaries, compliments about her perfume, leaning too far into personal questions, always watching. Meanwhile, Olivia's mind was fracturing under the weight of concealment. At work, She pushed through hearings with a stiff formality that felt foreign to her colleagues. She wore gloves during routine handling of court documents, citing flu season. In private, she researched judicial misconduct precedents and criminal charges related to HIV transmission. Some nights, she convinced herself she would turn herself in the next morning. By morning, she'd talk herself out of it. One evening, Olivia drove to the prison unannounced. She parked across the street, watching from her car. She couldn't go inside. She no longer had a case-related reason, but she needed to see Daryl, or remind herself of what he really was. She stayed for 20 minutes, then drove away. A correctional officer later noted the vehicle's plate and logged it, unsure if it was relevant, but felt compelled nonetheless. Back at the facility, Melissa Grant began cross-referencing the names of judges listed in prior oversight visits. Olivia's name appeared more frequently than expected. Melissa noted this, then reached out discreetly to a former nurse who had worked night duty. She used to meet with him when admin was empty, the nurse said. It wasn't protocol. Melissa didn't go to her superiors yet, but she began her own notes, just in case. And at home, Eric Hartman discovered an appointment card buried under junk mail, Olivia's HIV clinic. The date matched the week she began pulling away from him. He stared at it for a long time before placing it back exactly where he found it. Eric Hartman wasn't a confrontational man. A history teacher at the local high school, he had always respected Olivia's boundaries, but after finding the appointment card and connecting it to her cold behavior, he felt something deeper than confusion: dread. That night, he brought up the topic over dinner, cautiously. "Are you okay? Really okay?" he asked. Olivia didn't look up. "Just tired," she replied, her tone clipped. Eric paused. "I found something. A card from a clinic." She froze. Her fork hovered mid-air. Slowly, she set it down. "That's private," she said, carefully measured. "I'm your husband, Olivia. You're also not my doctor." The silence that followed was like a crack splitting their home. Eric didn't push further that night, but the seed of suspicion had been planted, and it would grow. Meanwhile, at West Haven, Melissa Grant requested archived logs of Judge Hartman's visits under the guise of procedural auditing. She noted something peculiar. While other judges' visits were brief and scheduled with clear documentation, Olivia had logged 8 private sessions with Daryl King over 4 months. In 2 cases, the meeting rooms were logged as unavailable for regular use, yet were marked in use under her name. Melissa wasn't ready to alert administration yet, but she compiled a timeline and forwarded it to herself from a private account. "Just in case," she whispered aloud, staring at the screen. At the same time, Daryl sensed the walls closing in, not physically, but socially. Inmates stopped engaging him like before. Word had spread he was too close to staff. Someone had called him the Pet Judges Project. Daryl didn't like feeling out of control. He started asking Officer Sloan more direct questions. "When's Hartman coming back?" "Why do you care?" Sloan responded. "She's not coming. That chapter's closed." Daryl's jaw tightened. He didn't like closed chapters. He liked leverage, and Hartman, wherever she was, still owed him something. Back in her chambers, Olivia stared at her own reflection in a dark window, whispering to no one, "You let him in. You did this." She pulled open her bottom drawer, retrieved a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To the Ethics Committee," then placed it back, unopened, again. 2 weeks passed with no word from Olivia to Daryl, and the silence stung. It wasn't rejection that bothered Daryl, it was powerlessness. He had always prided himself on his ability to control people, especially women. Olivia had been no different, until now. He drafted a letter on prison stationery. "You left without a word. That's not like you. Are you scared of what we did, or what they'll say if they find out?" He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The handwriting would say enough. At home, Eric watched Olivia more closely. Her late nights at the office, her sudden interest in locking her phone, her avoidance of intimacy. He tried to dismiss the worst-case scenario, but it was becoming harder. On a Saturday morning, while Olivia showered, he unlocked her laptop. He wasn't sure what he was searching for, just confirmation. He didn't find messages, but he did find the browser history. Searches about HIV laws, criminal transmission, and judicial ethics violations. One page was titled, "Can a judge be disbarred for personal misconduct?" He closed the laptop and stared blankly at the wall. This wasn't just about health. It was legal, dangerous, bigger than he imagined. Meanwhile, Melissa Grant took a risk. She spoke quietly to Officer Sloan in the staff lounge. "Did you ever notice anything unusual between Daryl King and Judge Hartman?" Sloan raised an eyebrow. "You're not the first to ask. She was here a lot. Too much. King got cocky every time she showed up. Something was off." Melissa nodded, careful not to share her notes. But now she had confirmation from another staff member. She documented it as a formal observation, still unsigned, and placed it in a locked drawer. Her plan was becoming clearer. One more piece of evidence, and she'd submit everything. Back at the courthouse, Olivia received Daryl's letter in her private mailbox. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The words felt like a trap, a test, or a threat. The letter wasn't angry. It was confident, entitled, as if he knew she wouldn't turn him in. And maybe he was right, but something inside her snapped. That night, she visited the clinic again, not for treatment, but to request her full medical file. The receptionist asked if she needed it for legal purposes. Olivia didn't answer, just nodded, eyes red and jaw clenched. She drove home with the envelope beside her, not sealed this time, already read, already real. Monday morning in the courthouse was unusually quiet. Olivia walked into her chambers just before 8 a.m., carrying a leather bag containing her medical file. She placed it on her desk without opening it again. A single post-it note was stuck to the top. Confidential, patient-requested copy. It might as well have read, evidence. Across town, Melissa Grant opened her encrypted folder and reviewed the documents for the final time. Visitation logs, Officer Sloan's testimony, her own signed observations. She hovered her mouse over the submit button on the internal affairs system, but hesitated. She knew once it was filed, it couldn't be taken back. This wasn't a routine ethics complaint. This was a potential scandal involving a sitting judge and a manipulative felon. Before she could click, a knock came on her office door. It was Warden Mendez. "Got a minute, Grant?" Melissa quickly minimized the screen. "Of course. Just wanted to check on something. We got a letter from an inmate to a private mailbox registered to Judge Hartman. It wasn't flagged until late. The contents vague but suggestive. Any idea if there's something we should be aware of?" Melissa kept her face still. "Judge Hartman hasn't visited recently. What kind of letter?" Weird tone, like he was continuing a conversation that shouldn't have been happening. Mendez sighed. "Look, I don't want to stir anything unless I have to. But I need to know if there's something formal you've seen." Melissa paused. "Nothing formal yet, but I am compiling some patterns. Let me know if that pattern becomes a problem," he said, then left. Back at home, Eric confronted Olivia, not with rage, but with quiet resignation. "I need to ask you something," he said as she walked in. "Are you in trouble?" Olivia froze in the doorway. "I don't want lies," he added. "Not anymore." She didn't answer. She set her bag down, sat on the edge of the couch. "There's something I did," she finally said, her voice almost inaudible. "It started with work, but it wasn't professional, and it wasn't harmless." Eric didn't interrupt. "I made a mistake, one I can't take back." "Are you sick?" he asked, though the answer was already written across her face. Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Eric stood. "I can't protect you from this, and I won't lie for you." She nodded, barely. Neither of them spoke again that night. The next morning, Olivia arrived at the courthouse before sunrise. She bypassed security, her judicial ID granting her silent access. She walked straight into her chambers and locked the door behind her. Alone, she pulled the sealed envelope addressed to the ethics committee from her drawer and laid it beside her open medical file. For the first time, she considered mailing both. Then her phone rang. It was the Office of Judicial Conduct. "Judge Hartman, we've received an anonymous inquiry regarding potential impropriety during your oversight visits to West Haven. We're required to follow up. Can we schedule a preliminary interview?" Olivia's heart skipped. "Of course," she said. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. It's informal, for now." She hung up and sat still for several minutes, barely breathing. Across town, Melissa Grant was already at her desk. Last night, after Warden Mendez's visit, she had emailed her compiled report to herself from a personal account as a backup. She hadn't clicked Submit to Internal Affairs yet, but she was close. She had also taken one more step, contacting her former supervisor at another facility who had dealt with a similar case, a psychologist manipulated by an inmate. The result had been disastrous, an overdose, and later, suicide. Melissa was determined not to let history repeat itself, but she also feared what might happen if she acted too late. Back at home, Eric sat alone in the kitchen, Olivia's medical file now in his possession. She'd left her bag unzipped. He didn't mean to look, but once he saw the HIV clinic logo, he couldn't stop. He didn't read the whole file, just enough to see the diagnosis date. February, the same month she had stopped touching him, the same month she began sleeping in the guest room. The betrayal twisted in his stomach like a sickness. He picked up his phone, then put it down, then picked it up again. Finally, he called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, his friend, now a criminal defense attorney. "I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, if a judge has HIV and gave it to someone without telling them, what happens?" There was a long pause on the other end. "That's not hypothetical," the voice said. "No," Eric admitted. "It's not." At West Haven, Daryl was growing increasingly frustrated. With no response from Olivia, and whispers among staff that he was being watched, he requested a meeting with Melissa Grant. She granted it. In the room, he leaned forward and smirked. "You're not like the others." Melissa folded her hands. "I'm not here to entertain you, Mr. King. Why did you really want this meeting?" He stared at her, then said coolly, "Some people forget who holds the secrets around here. That's dangerous." Melissa didn't blink. "And some people forget how short their leash really is." The next morning, Olivia sat stiffly in a small conference room at the Office of Judicial Conduct. A senior investigator, Thomas Beck, welcomed her with a tone that balanced politeness and formality. He had done this dozens of times before. "This isn't disciplinary," he began, "but the nature of the inquiry is sensitive. We've received a claim regarding potential boundary violations between yourself and an inmate, Daryl King." Olivia didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened around the armrests. "Have you ever engaged in private, unsupervised meetings with Mr. King during your visits to West Haven?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I've had case reviews that were conducted outside of standard hearing rooms, yes." Beck tilted his head slightly. "Were any of those meetings off the record?" She hesitated too long. "That's not a denial, Judge." Her voice cracked. "I didn't intend to violate any protocols." He folded his hands. "Intent and impact are different things." Olivia left the meeting in a fog. Outside the building, her hands trembled as she fumbled for her car keys. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Eric. "Just a question. Did he know?" She didn't respond. Meanwhile, Melissa Grant requested a closed-door meeting with Warden Mendez. "I've been compiling something regarding inmate Daryl King. It's serious. I believe a judge was compromised. I'm ready to submit it formally." Mendez sat back, jaw tight. "Why now?" "Because he's starting to escalate. I had a conversation with him yesterday. He was vague, but there was a tone, a threat." "You're sure?" "I've seen it before. He thinks he still has leverage." Mendez nodded slowly. "Submit the report. I'll notify Internal Affairs." Back at home, Eric met with the criminal defense attorney he'd called days earlier. They sat in a quiet office with the blinds drawn. Eric handed over copies of Olivia's search history and medical file. "She hasn't told anyone officially, but she's unraveling. I'm worried she'll try to cover this up, or worse, hurt herself." The attorney scanned the documents. "If she knew she was positive and exposed anyone, especially someone inside the prison system, this won't just be misconduct. It could be a felony. If Internal Affairs or the press get to it first, they'll bury her." Eric nodded grimly. "So what do I do?" "Get ahead of it. If she won't go public, someone else has to." In her locked chambers, Olivia finally opened the sealed envelope and began rewriting her letter to the Ethics Committee. This time it was clearer, more personal, more damning. But before she could finish, her office phone rang. It was the Internal Affairs Division. They had just received a formal report from West Haven Prison, and they were requesting an immediate statement. Internal Affairs gave Olivia 24 hours to respond to the complaint. By that night, she was pacing in her chambers, the phone on speaker, her voice recorder running. Every sentence she rehearsed fell apart before it finished. How could she explain months of misconduct, physical contact, private meetings, silence after learning her status, without destroying everything she had worked for? But this wasn't about saving her reputation anymore. It was about survival. She recorded, "I, Judge Olivia Hartman, had personal contact with Daryl King during my oversight visits. It began as a case follow-up. It became something else. I did not disclose my health status after my diagnosis. I regret everything. I didn't know how to stop it once it started." She deleted the file. Meanwhile, the report Melissa had submitted was now in the hands of State Corrections Oversight, which forwarded it to the Attorney General's office. The allegation now carried legal weight, not just ethical concern. Olivia was not only a sitting judge, she was now an accused public health risk with potential criminal liability. At the prison, Daryl King sensed the shift. 2 guards escorted him without explanation to administrative segregation. He knew the drill. Solitary. "What is this?" he asked calmly. "Pending investigation," one guard muttered. He didn't resist. He just smiled. He knew something was about to break, but he didn't think it would be him. Eric, too, had reached his limit. That night, he visited the office of a local journalist he'd once taught in high school. He brought a sealed envelope, documents, dates, copies of Olivia's browser history, her clinic record. "I'm not here to destroy her," Eric said. "I'm here because I think the truth is coming out no matter what. I'd rather it be told fully, not sensationalized." The journalist, Anna Voss, listened carefully. "This will blow up the courthouse. Are you prepared for that?" Eric shook his head. "No, but she gave him the power to ruin her. I can't just watch anymore." Back at the courthouse, Olivia walked the dark halls alone. She stopped in front of the ethics board's locked door, slipped the rewritten confession letter through the mail slot, then walked away, straight to her office where she received an email that stopped her cold. Subject, RE, Formal Complaint of Judicial Misconduct and Criminal Exposure Body. We are convening a formal hearing. Prepare a sworn statement. You are advised to seek legal representation. Her hands trembled. She sat down, and for the first time in weeks, she cried. By noon the next day, Olivia's name had leaked. It started quietly, a whisper among courthouse staff. Then, an unconfirmed article appeared online. West Haven judge under scrutiny for unethical conduct with inmate. No name in the headline, but the article quoted anonymous sources linking Olivia's oversight visits to Daryl King. By 4 p.m., news vans circled the courthouse. Olivia sat at her office desk, blinds drawn, heart pounding. Calls flooded her phone, reporters, law clerks, even old colleagues who hadn't spoken to her in years. She didn't answer any of them. At West Haven, Daryl watched from a solitary cell as guards whispered among themselves. One left a folded copy of the newsprint outside his door, on purpose. He read it through the glass. She's exposed now, he thought. He smirked. He didn't need to do anything anymore. She was burning herself down. Meanwhile, Melissa Grant was summoned for a formal debrief with State Corrections Oversight. She presented the timeline, visitation logs, corroborated staff statements, and her own observations. "You understand," one official said gravely, "that this isn't just about misconduct. If Judge Hartman knowingly exposed herself or others after testing positive, she could be facing criminal charges." Melissa nodded. "I understand." Privately, though, she feared it wouldn't end neatly. Daryl King was not the type to let go of a weapon, even a broken one. At home, Eric watched the news coverage in silence. He didn't tell Olivia that he had been the source behind the leak. In his mind, it no longer mattered. It was moving with or without them now. Still, guilt gnawed at him. He thought about the woman he had married, bright, principled, unstoppable, and the woman sitting now in the courthouse under siege, isolated, reckless, ashamed. He wondered if anything of the former remained. That night, Olivia drafted her sworn statement for the hearing. Every word was a blade. I engaged in a relationship with an inmate. I failed to disclose my health status. I acknowledge that my actions compromised the integrity of the court and endangered the well-being of others. She paused at the end. There was one thing she hadn't confessed, because it still terrified her. She hadn't told anyone that after learning she was infected, she had continued to meet Daryl secretly 2 more times. If they found out, the consequences would be irreversible, and she knew Daryl wouldn't protect her. Not now. He had nothing to lose. The formal misconduct hearing was scheduled for Friday. Olivia had 3 days to prepare, but time moved differently now, compressed and suffocating. Reporters waited outside her home. Her office was locked by order of the Judicial Review Board. She was placed on emergency suspension, pending criminal review. She had never been more visible or more alone. Meanwhile, Daryl King made his first move. A handwritten note was delivered to the prison warden. It was unsigned, but unmistakably from Daryl. Its content was simple. There are things Judge Hartman hasn't told you. Things that happened after she knew. Check the records from February 17th and March 3rd. I'm willing to cooperate, if I'm moved back into general population. Warden Mendez read it twice, then forwarded it to Internal Affairs. Within the hour, a quiet subpoena was issued for the facility's surveillance logs on those 2 dates. When reviewed, one detail immediately stood out. A 10-minute room entry in an unmonitored corridor office. Hartman's name was logged in the visitor file. Daryl was marked present. This was after her diagnosis date. Meanwhile, Eric received a call from journalist Anna Voss. "It's going national," she said. "By morning, it won't be just the local press. They're digging deeper. One of them just asked me about a second set of visits in late February. I didn't give them anything." Eric's silence was long. "I didn't know about that," he finally said. Back at the prison, Melissa Grant was pulled into a closed-door meeting with state oversight. "We have new material," the agent told her. "It contradicts Hartman's sworn statement. We'll need you to review it." When shown the logs, Melissa's expression darkened. She met him again, after the diagnosis. The room went still. That night, Olivia received an official notice. The Attorney General's office would now pursue charges not only of judicial misconduct, but of criminal exposure under state health law. It came with a warning. Failure to disclose material facts may result in obstruction charges. But what broke Olivia wasn't the charge. It was a photograph enclosed with the letter. A screenshot from the March 3rd visit, her hand on Daryl's shoulder, him smiling. She wasn't afraid in the image. She looked comfortable. The illusion of secrecy had been shattered completely. She sat alone in the kitchen for hours, staring at the picture, until Eric appeared behind her. "You lied again," he said softly. She didn't argue. "I didn't think I'd say this," he added, "but I hope they prosecute you, because if they don't, he'll come for you himself." The morning of the misconduct hearing arrived under heavy gray skies. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, their cameras trained on the entrance like predators awaiting a wounded animal. Olivia stepped out of a nondescript sedan, flanked not by supporters, but by 2 court-appointed attorneys, hired only days earlier after her own counsel withdrew, citing irreconcilable conflicts. She wore no robe, no jewelry, nothing that could be mistaken for confidence. Only the dark, shapeless clothing of someone already in mourning. Inside, the hearing room was full. State oversight officials, attorney general representatives, internal affairs investigators, and a few grim-faced reporters granted special access. At the center sat the Judicial Review Board, a panel of 5 judges, none of whom met her eyes. Melissa Grant entered quietly and took a seat near the back. She wasn't a direct witness today, but she knew her written report was among the thick binders stacked before the panelists. At exactly 9 o'clock, proceedings began. Olivia's voice shook as she answered procedural questions. Name, position, length of service. She was warned by her attorneys not to offer explanations unless asked. Then the chairwoman of the panel spoke. "We have received evidence of inappropriate and undisclosed meetings with inmate Daryl King, including after your confirmed HIV diagnosis. Do you wish to amend your previously submitted sworn statement?" A pause. Too long. I acknowledge the additional meetings occurred, Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A ripple moved through the room. And did you disclose your health status to the inmate prior to these meetings? No, Olivia admitted. Another wave. Cameras clicked from the side of the room. The chairwoman's tone sharpened. Are you aware that under State Code 518, failure to disclose communicable disease status constitutes a felony offense subject to imprisonment? Olivia's breath caught. I'm aware, she managed. Across the courthouse, Eric sat in a quiet cafe, watching the live feed through muted television captions. He didn't touch his coffee. When Olivia's admission scrolled across the bottom of the screen, he closed his eyes. There's no coming back from this, he thought. Back at West Haven, Daryl received news through the usual inmate channels. Hartman had confessed to post-diagnosis contact. He grinned, reclining against the concrete wall of his segregation cell. He hadn't even needed to testify. She had destroyed herself. But Daryl wasn't finished. His earlier letter had hinted at other secrets, and he had more to trade if it suited him. That afternoon, as the misconduct hearing adjourned temporarily, a secondary bombshell dropped. Internal Affairs had reopened another case connected to Daryl, an older fraud case Olivia had presided over. A review suggested she may have influenced the outcome improperly. Whether knowingly or through manipulation no longer mattered. The headlines now screamed louder. Fallen judge faces multiple felony charges. Prisoner holds key testimony. And Olivia, sitting alone in the empty hearing room as her attorneys whispered urgently nearby, finally understood. This wasn't about saving her career anymore. It was about survival. 2 days after the hearing, Olivia was placed under supervised house arrest pending her formal arraignment. An electronic ankle monitor was clipped around her left ankle, a visible humiliation she hadn't prepared for. Reporters camped outside her suburban home around the clock. Neighbors whispered. Her name, once synonymous with authority, was now a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, behind the walls of West Haven Prison, Daryl King made his final move. He submitted a written offer through his public defender. Testimony regarding Judge Hartman's undue influence in previous cases in exchange for sentence reduction and transfer to minimum security. It reached the Attorney General's office by noon. At first, authorities debated internally. Could Daryl be trusted? But the risk of more hidden misconduct outweighing the value of silence forced their hand. A conditional interview was scheduled, to be supervised and recorded. News of Daryl's offer leaked almost instantly. By evening, speculation churned that Daryl would not only confirm Olivia's misconduct, but reveal more buried cases tainted by her compromised judgment. Olivia's court-appointed attorneys urged her to prepare for a plea deal. They're going to hang everything on you, her lead counsel warned. Every outcome Daryl names will be a headline. You won't survive a full trial. Olivia said nothing. She felt like a ghost watching herself drown. That night, unable to sleep, Olivia broke house arrest protocols for the first time. Not physically, she remained inside, but she made a phone call she wasn't authorized to make. She called West Haven Prison using a prepaid phone and asked for Daryl King. The call was routed to the inmate line. It rang once, twice. Then, a familiar voice. Well, look who finally crawled back. I need you to stop, Olivia said, her voice trembling. Daryl chuckled lowly. Stop? Olivia, I'm just getting started. You thought you could throw me away when you got scared, but you and me, we're permanent now. I will confess everything, she whispered. There's nothing left to bargain with. There's always something left, Daryl said coldly. The question is, how much do you want me to keep quiet? The call disconnected before she could answer. The following morning, her attorneys were notified. Daryl King's testimony would be used to build a broader criminal conspiracy case, not just against Olivia, but against anyone connected to her oversight period at West Haven. Judges, guards, even administrative staff. Collateral damage. Faced with this tsunami, Olivia realized Daryl wasn't leveraging just her anymore. He was threatening to take down everything she'd ever touched. And there was one terrible truth she couldn't admit out loud. Even if she confessed, even if she accepted life in prison, Daryl would never let her go. Not until one of them was dead. The day of Daryl King's conditional testimony dawned clear and cold. Inside a secure wing of the courthouse, a special session had been arranged. Olivia Hartman would face Daryl directly for the first time since their affair became public. 2 deputies escorted Olivia through the back entrance, avoiding the gauntlet of reporters. Her wrists were not cuffed, yet, but the presence of armed guards made clear she was no longer part of the system. She was its subject. In a separate holding room, Daryl was prepared for transport. Clean-shaven, wearing an orange jumpsuit, he looked every inch the inmate, but the smirk he wore suggested something closer to triumph. He knew Olivia would be in the room. That had been part of his demand. He wanted her to see him rise as she fell. At 10 a.m., both parties entered the testimony room. No cameras, no reporters, just a court recorder, 2 attorneys, and 2 armed deputies. Olivia sat stiffly, her eyes hollow. Daryl strolled to the chair opposite her, chains clinking lightly at his wrists and ankles. He settled in with casual ease. The prosecutor addressed him first. "You understand the terms of this interview?" Daryl nodded. "I do. You'll be sworn under oath." He smiled lazily. Wouldn't miss it. The oath was administered, and questioning began. For the first 30 minutes, Daryl detailed Olivia's visits, their sexual encounters, her knowledge of his criminal background, and, critically, her post-diagnosis interactions. But then, Daryl veered. "She wasn't just careless," he said, his eyes locked on Olivia. "She was desperate. She begged me not to tell anyone. She offered favors, money, leniency, influence." Olivia flinched visibly. "That's not in your original statement," the prosecutor said sharply. Daryl shrugged. "You wanted the truth, right?" The room shifted, heavy with implication. Olivia's attorney leaned in and whispered, "We need a recess." But it was too late. Daryl leaned forward, voice low but venomous. "She's a liar. She lied to you. She lied to herself, and she lied to me." Olivia, trembling, finally broke her silence. "I never offered you anything," she said, voice cracking. "Really?" Daryl tilted his head. "Then what was it when you said, 'I'll make this right if you just stay quiet'? Sounds like a deal to me." The prosecutor moved to end the session, but the damage was done. As Olivia was escorted back to her holding room, she stumbled, her legs refusing to support her. She gripped the cold metal bench and stared ahead, her mind a blur. Meanwhile, Daryl was escorted back toward transport, but not without getting the final word. As he passed Olivia's door, he leaned close to the glass panel and whispered through it, "Next time, don't fall in love with the wrong monster." Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. By the end of the day, the Attorney General announced additional charges against her, bribery and conspiracy. And Daryl, with his testimony secured, was approved for transfer to minimum security. He had won, or so it seemed, because Olivia Hartman, stripped of everything, no longer cared about saving herself. And a person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind. The morning of Daryl King's transfer to minimum security was eerily quiet. A private prison van was scheduled to collect him from West Haven at 9 a.m. standard procedure. No cameras, no reporters. Unbeknownst to officials, Olivia Hartman had been released from house arrest for mandatory court processing that same morning. A mistake of timing no one thought to question until it was far too late. Inside the courthouse's basement level, where detainees were processed for transport and hearings, Olivia waited. She had no attorneys beside her. She was wearing plain clothes, the same dark, loose attire she had worn to her misconduct hearing. No purse, no jewelry, only a courthouse visitor's badge clipped to her collar. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was calm. At 8:55 a.m., Daryl King was escorted into the same secure corridor, shackled but grinning lazily as he recognized the path to his future freedom. 2 guards flanked him, chatting casually, distracted. Olivia moved fast. From beneath her jacket, she pulled a sharpened metal file, stolen from a maintenance cart left unattended in a nearby hallway. She crossed the distance between herself and Daryl with horrifying speed. Before anyone could react, Olivia plunged the file deep into Daryl's neck. The first scream came from a guard. Blood sprayed across the cinderblock walls. Daryl staggered backward, gurgling, hands useless against the torrent pouring from his throat. One guard tackled Olivia to the ground, wrenching the weapon from her hand. She didn't resist. She simply stared at Daryl, her face expressionless as he collapsed, twitching violently. Within seconds, additional officers flooded the hallway, weapons drawn, but it was too late. Daryl King bled out on the floor, his final moments spent staring in disbelief at the woman he had thought he controlled. Later, in custody, Olivia gave no formal statement. She simply repeated a single sentence. It was the only way to end it. The news broke within an hour. Fallen judge murders inmate who exposed her. Tragic final chapter to scandal. Public opinion was swift and brutal. Some saw Olivia as a villain, others as a tragic figure who snapped under the unbearable weight of her own collapse. Legal analysts debated whether it was an act of premeditated vengeance or a psychotic break, but it didn't matter. The consequences were immediate and final. Olivia Hartman was charged with first-degree murder. She was denied bail and placed on suicide watch. The judicial misconduct case was officially closed, rendered moot by criminal charges. State oversight announced a sweeping review of all cases Olivia had ever presided over. Eric, watching the news from a sterile motel room he now called home, felt no satisfaction. Only a deep, hollow sadness for the woman he had once loved, and for the pieces of himself that still grieved her. In the final days before her trial, Olivia reportedly said to a prison chaplain, "Some cages we walk into ourselves. Some cages we have to burn down just to leave." The trial never came. Olivia Hartman was found dead in her cell 3 weeks later. Cause of death? Suicide. The scandal left scars across West Haven, the courthouse, and the entire legal system of the state. Reforms were demanded. Investigations launched. But no law, no policy, could erase the story of how two broken people dragged each other, and everything around them, into ruin. And no one who knew them ever forgot how it ended.